Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy is Dracul mihawk niece? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. And also guys, so many people were telling me to make video on Naruto, also so for them I have made my new channel, so you can subscribe that channel also and see the video. The link for channel is in description. Go support and follow the amber.vale22 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Chapter 1. La Familia. The storm was pounding ruthlessly around the gloomy castle ruins of Kurogane Island and its neighboring islands, but Mihawk kept his smirk wide and amused. With a glass of the finest quality of red wine in one hand, he stood before the huge glass-paned window of his study room, patiently waiting for that cloaked figure to arrive. For the average human being, they would only hear the vicious howling of the wind, along with the heavy drizzle of the rain on the wet earth, but for someone like him, he knew better than to ignore it. He can hear her footsteps loud and clear, and even though the clouds have obstructed any source of light from the heavens, save for some occasional flashes of lightning, combined with a thick mist brought by the strong rain, his trained golden hawk-like eyes can still see her deep purple cloak piercing through the darkness. It only took him a few seconds to gracefully place his goblet on a table near the fireplace, and a few more seconds to stand before the front door. Truly it was an abnormal feat for the masses, but believe it or not, it is a must if you want to keep up with the likes of them. With grace that he is known to carry himself with, the regal Shichibukai opened the tall wooden doors of his residence, only to be met with Taka-chan. The woman screamed with joy and excitement as she flunged herself to the swordsman, who only sweat-dropped at the childish nickname. "Welcome to my humble abode, One-E-san," he greeted quietly with his usual monotonous voice that somehow has a small hint of amusement and fondness blended in it as he returned the hug with his own. Now, don't let this rare show of affection fool you, because as strange as it may sound, the feared swordsman is not as cold and ruthless as everyone thinks he is. Sure, he is like that to strangers, which is about 99.99% of the world's population, but not the selected close friend, and definitely not to family. Especially when it comes to his hard-headed but equally talented and scarier older sister who he have not seen this past few years. Oh, and who is this older sister I speak of, you ask? Why, it's none other than the bloody Baroness Monkey Knee Dracul de Lolita. A recently retired pirate turned revolutionary who gained infamy with her marvelous swordsmanship that earned her a spot as the commander of Whitebeard's 2nd Division before getting married to the love of her life and decided to give her husband a hand in achieving his dreams to take down the world government. It's a she triumphantly announced, and with a sigh the world's greatest swordsman fished out a couple of gold coins from his pocket and handed it to the Baroness, who in return removed her soaking cloak with a graceful flourish, revealing a sleeping infant safely tucked in her backpack, which made the younger brother's eyes to widen further in disbelief. His sister always fastens her sword at her back. This is blasphemy. Lies. Mihawk's gawking was prolonged as he saw his sister's contented smile as she cradles the baby near her bosoms, humming a very familiar song ripped out of their childhood as she rocked the infant gently, truly a stark contrast from her usual snappy and careless movements that he grew up with. He saw how the infant's eyes fluttered open as soon as she hears her mother's angelic voice. And all this while, the mentioned swordsman, who was still in an uncharacteristic daze, was pulled back to reality as a pair of onyx orbs stared into his golden ones. It was just once, and with one look he knows. He knows that this girl would someday possess unimaginable power due to the blood that was coursing through her veins, which was only waiting to be unlocked to its full potential with the proper training. She being a bearer of the D in her name was already a dead giveaway. He also knows that this tiny girl would one day bear beauty that can raise 1,000 ships and fury that can sink them all upon her will. Perhaps, maybe she can even compete with the pirate empress in the appearance department. A tuft of raven locks crowns her head, big and round onyx orbs highlights the entirety of her face, and a smile that seems too big yet complements everything. Yep, she would certainly be a beauty. Unfortunately, he also knows what dangers await this child, as she was the offspring of the world's 2 most wanted criminals. She wasn't the only one in this world to be condemned solely for existing. What's her name? He stammers awkwardly as he neared the mother and child. Lafita, Monkey D. Lafita, or Luffy for short, she answered with a small soft smile, while readjusting the infant in her arms for her brother to get a closer look at her treasure. Hello Luffy, he said in his softest voice, trying very hard not to scare the child, because he's not that oblivious to the fact that he has a daunting appearance. He was already anticipating the shrill cry from his niece as he leans closer, but had the surprise of a lifetime when the infant's bubbly laughter flooded the castle walls as its tiny little hands touches his face. The lips slowly curled upwards at the slightest with amusement. If the world wants her dead, then I'll just have to make sure that she can fight back, huh? And decided then and there that a small impromptu feast is necessary for this occasion. Why, it's not every day that a D. is born in this world, is it? Unknown island in the East Blue. It has been a few hours since his wife and daughter had left their temporary base, and Monkey D. Dragon couldn't be any more grateful with the timing, as his father Monkey D. Garp had conveniently decided to drop by their humble residence unannounced when he catches wind that his rebellious son was now father and he a grandfather. And while the chief of command of the revolutionary was truly happy that his old man had bothered coming all the way from the Marine headquarters, considering that it was in the Grand Line, he also knows what his old geezer would do if he saw his small bundle of joy. Which is probably forcing them to give her up to him or blatantly kidnap his daughter and raise her with the same ideology he grew up with but has stubbornly refused up to this very day. Of course he didn't want that for his daughter. He refuses the thought of leaving his own flesh and blood to his father, who would surely train the kid in an abusive fashion and neglect the innocent child's personal and emotional needs with the excuse of being independent. It sickens him at the thought that his child would grow up unattended and alienated from familial affection like him. His father was a good man and means well to others, but he is probably the last person in their list to be the guardian of his daughter. Thus, he immediately and fervently agreed to his wife's suggestion that Laphita would probably do better if she was left with her uncle than his grandfather. Besides, it is hypocrisy if he, the man who is fighting for freedom, would take away the freedom of his own kin. And as night went on and their conversation had turned tiresome for one Monkey D. Dragon, he decided to send away his daughter's grandfather with only a picture as a consolation and a triumphant smirk under his olive cloak. Somewhere in the New World, Moby Dick. The air of anticipation in the galley of the Moby Dick couldn't get any more thicker as everyone was waiting for their brother and the first mate of the Whitebeard pirates, Marco, to arrive. It was only made known a few minutes ago that a mail from a certain sister of theirs had landed on the deck and the blonde had eagerly volunteered to fetch the letter along with the 4th Division commander, Thatch. As it was wiser for them to go together than everyone else, causing a mini stampede. Now if only the ship that carries 2,000 pirates was smaller, then the mythological zone would have little to no effort in going back and forth, but as it was the same size as a small village, it would probably roughly take anyone a couple of minutes to reach the other side and another few to come back. The agonizing wait was finally over when a loud bang echoed through the halls and everyone's attention whipped to the direction at breakneck speed. Whitebeard himself was pretty excited at the prospect of hearing from his daughter, who found her dream in a different place, but nevertheless had continued to grace them with news and letters about her well-being and is still considered a part of their huge family. The 1st Division commander didn't waste any more time as he handed the envelope to his father figure and captain before taking a seat, as he was pretty interested at the contents of the letter as well. A little too excited if you ask Izo. Whitebeard, who carefully opened the envelope with gentleness unexpected from a man his size, cleared his throat as he read the message for everyone to hear. "Dear Oyaji and the rest of you knuckleheads," he said with a small chuckle as he raises his gaze towards his sons and daughters. "I am writing this letter to inform you that from today onwards, if this letter did arrive on the same day in which I wrote it," he said with humor on the second part, earning a round of chuckles from the crew until Whitebeard raised a hand to signal that he was going to continue. "That you are now certified aunts and uncles to my daughter, or in Oyaji's case, the grandfather of Monkey D. Laphita, born on the 5th of May this year." There was a brief moment of silence that followed before a loud cheering erupted from the thousands of pirates old or new. Thatch even jumped from his seat and bear hugged the nearest to him, which was unfortunately the youngest and not to mention the smallest, Haruta, and proceeded to choke the air out of the tiny commander, who futilely flailed like a headless chicken in the arms of the cook. When the noise died down, everyone settled in their seats again as the captain took it as a sign to continue reading. "Sadly, as time is of the essence, my loving husband and I decided to drop her off at my brother's place because it is much nearer from the East Blue than the New World, and for that, I ask for your forgiveness." Taking a slight pause, Whitebeard chuckled again at the sight of the so-called adult pirates who slumped at the words like brats who were told that Christmas was cancelled. But he smiled towards the crew. "I will surely instruct my younger brother to bring Laphita to the Moby Dick at a much later time so that she can personally meet my second home and family. Please look out for her as you have done for me, from your eternally grateful daughter and sister, Lolita," he finished before putting down the letter. A spell of unspoken excitement enchanted the whole of the Moby Dick as the final words in the letter were spoken. Some were smiling serenely while the others, who couldn't keep their joy to themselves, was already burning with determination to be a good UNCLE Marco. They may have not got the chance to meet their youngest member as to speak, but they would diligently wait for that day to come, and when it does, oh. They swear to Kami that they would have the grandest of party that would put a certain red hair's party into shame. What are you all waiting for? This calls for a celebration. Gurgana Island. The storm had moved on along with the darkness of the night, leaving a cold and thick morning fog that enveloped the whole of the island. The two Dracul sibling along with baby Lafitta was currently in the spacious dining hall, sharing a sumptuous breakfast of bread, eggs and meat, and in the infant's case, a few bottles of warm baby formula, as she unsurprisingly shared the same gluttonous appetite as her grandfather's. Face devoid of expression but heart filled with a whirlwind of emotion, Lolita faced her brother and said, "I intend to leave Lafitta in your care, Mihawk," while at the same time tending to the small lump of happiness in her lap, who had no clue of the conversation as of the moment. The other flinched a millimeter at the rare sound of his name being said by his sister with a serious yet conflicted voice, but as understanding was clearly visible in his usual stoic facade, Mihawk faced his sister and replied, "Okay." She smiled as she wipes the droplets of milk from her daughter's mouth and looked up to her brother. "You are his uncle after all, make sure you train her for whatever comes in her way." "I understand, but what would I tell her?" "Everything, tell her we love her, but a battlefield isn't where a kid should grow up." She softly answered as her gaze fell towards the east. "Tell her mother and father loves her, tell her that we're doing this for her, for that kid named Ace, for everyone." He nodded in reply, he too had seen firsthand that some of the government's decision had become unjust and downright cruel. But he is not at the moment concerned of that matter. "Please raise Lafitta knowing what true justice is, teach her how to be good and to be kind," and with those final words, the swordmistress left her family behind as she sailed back to her mission. Chapter 2. How to be a father. A few months had passed ever since his sister had handed baby Lafitta in his care, and Mihawk was already a wreck from all the crying, pooping, eating and more crying. He didn't expect that taking care of an infant was this agonizing and meddlesome. The first to get messed up was his habitual nap time that he religiously followed throughout the years. Couple it up with sudden outbursts at night, and his usually clear golden eyes had now turned a little copper-ish from being bloodshot. He even resorted into drinking more coffee past the human boundaries for additional energy, just to keep up with the bouncing baby. Next to go on the list of how a baby wrecked my life was his favorite pastime, which was taking long hot baths while reading a good book. It irked him that while the baby was to be made sure clean throughout the day, he, on the other hand, was now a shadow of his former glorious self. He longed for his meticulous regimen of shaving his facial hair, fixing his hair into its usual fashion, and dressing himself in elegant garbs, as he opted to look out for the child every minute that it was awake. No one said that he was not a paranoid. But those two was just the tip of the iceberg, as the thing that is truly important to him, and the reason that he bothers to wake up every day, was cruelly taken away by a 3-month-old baby with its tiny hands, was his pride and joy. His swordsmanship. Ever since the baby D had arrived in his life, the royal Shichibukai had not got any chance to touch his famed sword. Thus, he no longer traveled in his boat searching for a worthy rival just to attend to the infant's constant needs. It was very unjust and tiring, but Dracul Mihawk had never grumbled about it up to this moment. The reason why is because his sister had done the same for him. Lolita is only a year older, but the burden in her shoulders when they were young was nothing to what is happening to him now. They did grew up in the lap of luxury, gold and silver was sprinkled to them like confetti, but all those things didn't fulfill what they really needed at that time. Love, care and affection. Their parents were too busy with their business that they left the two for years on end, to the point that they even sometimes forget their children's names. He was only 4 at that time, and whenever he asks where they were, her sister would only reply with a smile and say they're at work, so that we can eat properly and have clothes to wear and go to school and stuffs like that. He didn't give much thought about it back then, but as he grew up he began to see how it taxed his older sister greatly. Cooking their meals, cleaning after his messes, making their beds, making sure that he understands his lesson at school, polishing his swordsmanship, tucking him in bed at night, comfort him at times of sadness, and so much more that a girl of her age should not do. He was guilty of the fact that she didn't have any time for herself at all, and had reached to the point that she had neglected her own needs until the time came that he was already self-sufficient and their parents had hired servants that was so long overdue. And for that, he can't help but be eternally indebted to his sister. It is now time to make his own. For a true and honorable swordsman should repay whatever debt he has. It may not need to be repaid in gold, but if repaying that debt means that his small luxuries would be temporarily unavailable to him as of the moment, then so be it. It is no wonder that love can move people in mysterious ways. It's only been half a year, but Mihawk can't see it clearly through his eyes, the changes brought by that little girl named Lafitta. Change is inevitable, as it is a constant process that is present in one's life and is a must for progress towards the future. Mihawk understands that notion very well, but it couldn't be helped that he was a little unnerved at first. He knows better than to resist what was to come sooner or later. It was very subtle at first, to the point of being barely noticeable, starting with that weak niggling feeling at the back of his head when he is not sure what the infant is up to, or when the pesky baby in his arms would twitch or squirm in discomfort. It was like reminding to make sure that she was happy and contented. It was soon followed by a shocking revelation that he no longer had the same taste when it comes to his books of choice. Those steamy and exciting though very predictable stories that he enjoys during a bad weather or whenever he had the time had now been replaced by books about child rearing and development. And the fact that it does not bore him at all had his heart stopping for a few seconds at most. Then and there he concluded that something is definitely wrong with him. There were also some changes that manifests itself physically. Point in case the castle itself had change. Back when he has living alone, Mihawk only stocks his pantry with wheat and oil for bread, his refrigerator for meat and his cellar for wine. Nothing more, nothing less. But as the days flew by, he finds himself buying mundane kitchen accessories every time he goes out for provisions. He keeps telling himself that he would probably use it in the near future. The foreboding atmosphere of the castle seems to have been affected by change, as well as he noted that it became lighter as every time the infant in his hand would laugh. As if the shadows were being effectively pushed back to the corners. The candle flames had become warmer too. Like it was burning with passion just to keep the 6-month-old warm and comfortable during the cold nights. But the biggest change of all took him by the hand as he soon realized it. He was a man back then, a gentleman with a sense of chivalry and morals. And don't get him wrong, he is still the man that he is, probably better than before. Because now, he is a father. He sees change like a dual-edged blade. It could be bad, or it could be for the greater good. But at the end of the day, it is up to us as to how we can make that change beneficial, and Mihawk certainly agrees with that. He was raising a D after all. Chapter 3. A first for everything. Watching someone accomplish something done for the first time brings a feeling of joy and pride to everyone, especially when that someone is special to us. For Mihawk, it was in the tiny but lively form of tiny little Luffy. Ever since he began reading a book about how infants develop physically and cognitively, he had set his hawk-like gaze on the kid who is starting to adapt in her surroundings. The first of these accomplishments was just a little after her 8th month when she successfully pushed herself up in all fours. He knew right away that it is only a matter of time before everything else follows. He didn't realize how right he was at his assumptions. Day after day, baby Luffy had began her attempts in crawling. When she feels like it, she can manage to crawl for a few minutes with short rests in between before continuing again. Unfortunately, as her brain is still in the developing process, baby Luffy was often distracted by other things that catches her eye to the point that she abandons what she was doing at the moment and prioritizes the thing that catches her attention. This action did not bother Mihawk at all, as he reminded himself that every baby have their own different ways of learning. When the month has passed, Luffy had began crawling in greater distance, and boy did the great swordsman nearly jump out of his trousers when he felt a tiny hand grab his leg while he was busy cooking lunch. Another month flew by, and the Shichibukai found himself gaping in anticipation as he saw his daughter trying to pull herself upright, using the leg of a chair. He was even clenching his fist unconsciously, as if the action was giving some extra strength to the girl. But alas. Little Luffy wasn't ready yet, as her legs wasn't strong enough to stand on its own dot. It dampened the swordsmaster's mood greatly, but vanished right away as he heard her laugh and clapped her hands in happiness. She eventually succeeded the 5th time around, but only managed to keep herself standing for a few seconds before falling face first, resulting in a panicking warlord and a shishishing, but still face-planted Luffy. Luffy was now in her 11th month when she started to teeth on things. As long as it fits, she eats. The Shichibukai, who had now grown wiser after almost a year of looking out for the infant. He had kept away any object that she might choke on, and also began mashing things in order to introduce solid foods into the girl's tummy as the book had suggested. As expected of a D, she was quite the eater. Oftentimes, the warlord would sneak in some small chunks of meat or anything that is soft but chewy to train her developing teeth for the much anticipated adult foods. The sun had barely risen from the horizon, but we find the daddy Shichibukai awake with a cup of coffee in one hand and a cookbook in the other, as to answer why he was already alive and kicking at this time of the morning was because today is Lafida's birthday. But, unlike any other birthdays, this would be her first. So of course, a celebration is a must. It is also a reminder that the baby had successfully survived the critical phase of infancy, and of course, what would be a birthday party without the traditional birthday cake? So Reedy did all morning searching for the perfect recipes, deciding that the party for 2 will be held at noon, as the celebrant herself was still out like a light. A man like him wouldn't settle for anything less, and even though he wasn't much of a cook, he believes that anything made with your own hands, no matter how bad it is made as long as it was done out of love, is the greatest gift of all. It took him some time, but eventually decided that chocolate cake sounds good for the occasion, as well as the instructions were rather easy to follow through. As Lafita was now contently playing with her toys, the royal Shichibukai then started to gracefully maneuver around the kitchen, first with preheating the oven, then with the tools and lastly the ingredients. Cooking, in his opinion, wasn't difficult at all, but in return, everything needs to be done carefully and precisely to avoid ruining the quality of the meal. As a rule of thumb, the dessert should always be the first to be done as it was often served cold. Turning his gaze to the book, he read the recipe in his mind as he began measuring and separating the ingredients in 2 different containers with great concentration, one for the dry and another for the wet. He started with the former as the measuring tool would be soiled if he does so. 2 cups of Butterlin cake flour. 2 cups of West Blue sugar. 3/4 cup Dresden chocolate. 2 teaspoons Torino baking powder. 1/2 teaspoons Torino baking soda. 1 teaspoon Grand Line salt. 1 teaspoon of Cactus Island espresso powder. Pausing for a second, he glanced behind his shoulder to see what his daughter is doing, and a small rare smile decorated his regal features when the tiny figure flashed a gummy smile at him while clapping her hands, as if she was wishing her daddy Uncle luck in his task. Seeing that the girl wasn't in any danger or whatsoever, he then went back to work. 1 cup milk. 1/2 cup vegetable oil. 2 fresh eggs. 2 teaspoons Skypian vanilla. 1 cup boiling water. Making sure that the dry ingredients are thoroughly blended, he then poured the liquid in the other container and with a spatula mixed the 2 to form the batter. Carefully dividing the mixture in 2 round trays, Mihawk then didn't waste any more precious time and slid the tin containers inside the oven so that he can proceed with the icing. The icing was fairly easy to put together as it only relies on powdered chocolate, butter, vanilla, ground coffee, milk and sugar. When the frosting had turned to the right consistency, he gave the mixing spatula a lick and was immensely pleased with the results. He is pretty sure Luffy would also like it as well. After the cake sponge was taken out of the oven and cooled like the icing, he began frosting the cake evenly and when done, took a few moments to appreciate his work. Who knew cooking can be this gratifying? With the main objective done, the next on the list was the main course. Fortunately, it needn't to be that grand, as he was only cooking for 1.5. Mihawk is a practical man, and so he is not keen into wasting food. Perusing through the book for the second time, he found a recipe for a hearty stew that is both nutritious and takes very little time to prepare, as it was only 1.5 hours before noon. Cutting the meats and various vegetables was as easy as pie for the great swordsman, so it was no shock that the stew was already on the burner within a few minutes and the salad carefully arranged in a bowl. Lunchtime rolled around and the father and daughter was now seated side by side at the table, surrounded with food in their arm's reach, the cake at the center and boxes of presents at the far end. With Mihawk scooping their individual servings, the 2 began to eat. Even though Luffy can't speak at the moment and is practically shoving the food inside her mouth, the warlord was proud with his work as he noted that the infant was squealing with delight. He did a pretty good job, but the highlight was yet to come as Luffy didn't blow her candle yet. And so he lighted the lone piece of wax and sang in a voice that no one expected from him with only the infant as the sole witness. Irashi na kaiwa, he moved near the infant whose big darker eyes were focused on the flame. Tanashi na kaiwa near, he kneeled in front of the 1-year-old and presented the cake like an offering. Panjabi Ameditu. Luffy clapped her hands and giggled, seemingly enjoying the moment. O Yuta wo Yutamishu. And together, they both blew the candle flame. Happy birthday Lafita. To be continued. Amik. Half a year flew by like the wind, and in that period of time Mihawk realized something. Lafita has yet to say her first word. He was informed by the book that it should be around this time, but knowing how paranoid he is, he immediately assumed that he did something wrong and blamed himself a little for it. He was indeed a quiet man, but he forgot that infants learn communication from their parents. And he never said much around the kid. Unconsciously, the warlord began talking to himself. I need to find a way to teach Luffy how to speak. He was so deep in thought he forgot about the child behind him. She blurted out, but as of the moment, he wasn't listening. Maybe I should call Akagami, he does have someone in his crew who knows a thing or two about kids. Ada. Lafita shouted louder, but again, his head was way up in the clouds. On second thought, maybe it's too early to tell him what to do. He stroked his bearded chin absent-mindedly. He didn't see that Lafita was already tearing up. Yua. The shrill sound immediately alerted the father, who took the baby from her crib and nestled her securely in his arms. Oh, what's wrong Luffy? He rocked the baby a little to calm her down. Do you want me to sing? The baby shook her head. Did you poo-poo? Again, she shook her head. Are you sleepy? For the third time, she shook her head and this time more fervently. Mihawk stopped. Are you hungry? Okay. Let's go get you some food. It was about 2:45 a.m. when Mihawk's eyes suddenly snapped open. Damn it. Chapter 4. 3 is for trouble. With Lafita turning 3 last month, Dracul Mihawk finds himself with more than an armful of the girl, ever since she had started to learn the basics of walking and talking. Broken numerous of expensive decorations. Check. Random colorful doodles on the castle walls. Double check. A much enormous appetite. Big fat check. While it did bring more headache for the adult, it did not worry him at all, as it simply meant that the kid was lively and has a good, sunny disposition. He had also noted that with the advancement of her age, her quirks and likes started to appear as well. For one, the little girl likes to wear dresses, and as long as it was not too stuffy or gets in the way of her fun, she would definitely wear it without much complaints. She also has a questionable devotion for meat, whether it's in the form of stews, barbecues or steak, as long as it is meat, her ever so plump lips would contort into a face-splitting grin. What even shocked the Shichibukai last night was she even begged for seconds after she ate an adult-sized meal. She also has a certain degree of fondness for anything red, as proven by her current outfit, which is a rose red sleeveless silk dress that goes below her knees, matched with a pair of shiny red doll shoes, and further accentuated with a red silk hairband. It was very adorable in his opinion, a tad excessive with the eye-watering color, but overall it suits her. But those things are the least of his worries, as those things are pretty ordinary for a growing kid. What intrigued him the most was her fondness for dancing. It's not that it was bad or wrong, she actually has a talent for it. The matter at hand here is that it greatly resembled her mother's, more specifically, her sword style, the infamous Yon-ken, or otherwise known as the beguiling sword. A sword style that incorporates dancing while heavily focusing on agility, grace and speed, rather than brute strength. It is also the very same sword style that defeated Mihawk numerous of times in occasional duels with her sister. Curiosity getting the best of him, it was after dinner when Mihawk decides to take the matter in his own hands. Lafita. Hi. She said with a smile as she approached her father. Who taught you how to dance like that? He asked her in a soft voice. To be honest, Luffy didn't know the answer as well, so she shrugged nonchalantly and continued back to where she left off, leaving Mihawk thinking for the rest of the evening as to what to do next. A few weeks after, and much to the Shichibukai's surprise, the girl was becoming better and better with her moves. She can now do cartwheels and splits, as well as move gracefully and quietly if she wants to. The number of broken things inside the castle was also reduced. It also brought a great deal of excitement in the swordsman's part, as he can already see what the future holds for her tiny princess. So, when dinner time ended, he decides that now is the best time to execute his plan. Luffy, do you want to play a game? He calls Lafita, whose head whipped towards his direction with neck-breaking speed, grinning and nodding enthusiastically, much to the Shichibukai's sweat dropping. She stood up from the carpet and flops down in front of his father. What kind of game, Papa? She asks eagerly as she completely ceased her previous activity. Mihawk in response pulled out a red bandana from his pocket and dangled it in front of the girl, whose eyes were sparkling like a cat. Hide and go seek, he said with a smirk. I love hide and go. Wait, what's the bandana for? She asks again out of curiosity. She knows that bandanas aren't used in that game. Well, to make the game more interesting, I added 2 new rules. He said as he held 2 fingers in the air. First, is you have to wear a bandana, and second, you have to dance while you look for me. He explained in a voice that was only reserved for his daughter, though the cunning smirk was still etched on his lips. I'm not sure about that, but okay. She hesitantly concedes while the adult knelt and tied the piece of clothing around her eyes. Papa. How would I find you? I can't see a thing. A frown was etched on her lips as soon as she realized that she can't see anything at all. That's the point. You need to use your other senses to find me, your sense of smell. He pressed her nose with a finger, making the girl chuckle. Your sense of hearing, he continued as his hands traveled to her ears and snapped his fingers, and your sense of touch, he finished as he brushed the back of his hands on her arm, while the clueless toddler hesitantly nodded. And so the game started. Little did Lafita know that she had already started her training under the great swordsman. She tried smelling the air first, as her papa always smells like roses. She twirled towards that direction, but her back met the cold stone wall. She tried again, but unknowingly ended up at the opposite side of the room. Lafita was growing frustrated by the minute, but even so, she tried again, with this time, her sense of touch. Raising her hand sideward, she twirled around very slowly, so that if something is blocking her way, she would know first and avoid it. The action made the warlord nod his head in satisfaction. She was learning very quickly, and as if sensing his action, the girl's head turned to his direction before executing a cartwheel and leaping directly towards his arms with a shishishi. Found ya? She exclaimed gleefully before squealing in delight as a pesky hand tickled her torso. A job. Mihawk exclaimed and stopped the torturous tickling, then put her down. But how did you know where I was? He asks, feigning ignorance. Lafita pulled the blindfold upwards before holding a finger under her chin. I don't know, it's like I know you're there, she honestly answered and gave a look asking if she was in trouble. The father of the toddler shook his head dismissively and reassured her by ruffling her long raven locks. That, my child, is your observation haki. He relented slowly so that the girl would understand. Observation haki. She tilted her head cutely. Bukikuku, yes. To put it simply, it means you can sense what others can't. He explained. Is that bad? Not at all. If not, it's actually better, he voiced out to the girl, who seemed relieved. The days went by and little by little, the girl started to unknowingly awaken her observation haki through their games. She already stopped calling Mihawk's name when they weren't on the same room, as she can now pinpoint where her papa is. Mihawk was fairly impressed with the development, though she still has a long way to go, as she is only using it by instinct, rather than her will alone. Later that year, during one fine afternoon, we found the two together in the downright creepy coffin-shaped boat of the warlord, drifting along the vast sea of the Grand Line. It seems that the older had deemed Laphita ready to see what's beyond the castle walls. He was very aware of the fact that the castle can only teach her as much, and while there are books and a sufficient space for her to learn and roam around, she also needs to meet people and to occasionally bask under the sun to balance everything out. As the island came into sight, he can see that his daughter can't hide her excitement. Her big brown eyes were sparkling, her lips locked in a face-splitting grin, and her long black hair was being tousled by the mild wind. Appa. What are we gonna do there? She pointed towards the speck of land. Oh, nothing much, he said with a small serene smile, and removed a stray lock of hair away from her daughter's face. Maybe buy some food, eat at a restaurant and look around town. He continued and was pleased to receive an approving nod. Upon arrival, Laphita jumped towards the docks much to her father's chagrin and ran hastily towards the merchants who had built small tents around the port to greet arriving travelers. She was surprised to see stalls rowed together selling various stuffs, from small trinkets to colorful, and not to mention girly accessories, grilled snacks and even cold drinks that were perfect for the weather were also readily available. Every color, sound and smell fascinated the 3-year-old girl. It was her first time experiencing these things. Back home she can only have fun inside the castle as the exterior, and the surrounding forest was always laden with fog. This didn't escape the warlord's gaze, and instantly recognized that yearning in his daughter's eyes. He didn't disturb the girl any further, and only went to her side when she needed some coins to buy what caught her eyes. With a small bag in her hands, Laphita walked side by side with his father after they both had lunch. The wide smile that decorates her eyes and lips were a giveaway to anyone she passes by that the girl is contented and happy. She was only then pulled out from her euphoria when her father stopped in front of a building with the word arms shop written at the front. Luffy, I have some things to do in this store, her father said. She nodded as she understood that her papa wants some fun too. What's inside? She asks with her voice filled with curiosity. You'll see, her papa said to her with a small smile. But, I want you to promise me that you will not touch anything without asking for permission. He said again, but this time with a small amount of sternness in his voice. Okay. I promise. She wholeheartedly answered. And so the father and daughter went inside. As soon as the bell behind the door gave a shrill tinkling sound, a man what Luffy thinks is about 40 years old appeared behind the sidelines and greeted them with a nervous smile. Ah. Welcome, sir, Royal Shichibukai Dracul Mihawk, how may I help you? He tensed up as he rubbed his hands together. She curiously looked up to her father, wondering what Sir Royal Shichibukai is, but the lack of expression in her father's face tells her that they can talk about it later. It's fine, I'm just looking for some new designs. He answered dismissively before grabbing Luffy's hands lightly and pulling her further inside the store. Luffy's wide brown eyes wandered at the shiny metal thingies hanging on the wall. She had never seen so much swords in her life. Well, there's her father's collection, but those in these are differenter somehow. At some point, she was really tempted to touch one, but as she promised her father, who was currently engaged in a conversation with the store guy as of the moment, she tried her very best to contain herself, causing the store clerk and Mihawk to look at her with worry as she was fidgeting. What's wrong, Laphita? Is something bothering you? He asks. Luffy pointed a finger at the array of rapiers and finally expressed her dilemma. Please let me touch one. Mihawk considers it for a moment. He was internally weighing the situation if it would be safe or not. But then again, he wasn't the world's greatest swordsman for nothing. So bottom line, he concedes and hands the lightest rapier to a 3-year-old toddler who doesn't even know how to count yet. The girl took it from his outstretched hand with both hands, handle first, with amazement, and backed away for precaution. She raised the sword above her head and swung it downwards, pretending there is an invisible opponent in front of her. Mihawk did not comment but proceeded to watch on. He mentally noted that the girl's stance was off, and her strike was quite sloppy, but there's a certain degree of control and some strength, as he expects the sword to hit the floor. That wasn't bad at all. He expressed quite loudly. He too recognized the potential as the owner, who looked at him seriously and nodded his head in agreement. That is so cool. She said, grinning from ear to ear. So in the end, the two walked out of the store with smiles on their faces as they both got something for themselves. On their way back to the port, a thick crowd suddenly flocks towards them as it seems that there is some commotion in the town square. They both didn't care as to what it is as they were already contented from their shopping spree and only wishes to head back to the comforts of their home. He held out a hand to his daughter to grab on, but as he turned his head, the girl beside her was gone. Laphita. For the longest time in his life Mihawk felt the dread pooling in his stomach. Luffy he turned his head in every direction, but he can't find his daughter. He used his observation haki, but the crowd proved to be a nuisance in his radar. Damn it. He loudly cursed before running towards where the crowd was. Luffy didn't see it coming, a stray arm bumped her on the shoulders, while a leg pushed her backwards. She saw his father's hand and tried to grab it, but before she knew it, she was already in an unfamiliar place. Mihawk made a mad dash towards the crowd as he shouted his daughter's name. He pushed anyone in his way disregarding their gender, but the warlord didn't care about that now. He needs to find his Luffy. He saw a small mop of raven locks, and relieved flooded him. He grabbed the figure's shoulder only to be met with a different face. Mihawk was seriously considering if he should just slash the whole crowd in half. Luffy heard someone shout her name, but as her small stature can only give her limited vision, she can't see beyond the sea of limbs around her. She was left with no choice but to weave through the crowd. She somehow managed to get out, but as she looked around, she notices that she ended up in a more gloomier and somehow isolated part of town. Appa. She calls out in a broken voice, tears were now pouring out of her eyes. She was all alone now. After crying for several minutes, Laphita eventually managed to calm herself up. She figured out that crying would get her nowhere. I need to find my papa, she said with determination while wiping the last remnant of tears from her eyes and took several steps in a random direction. She tried feeling the atmosphere around her as she walks, but sadly, the downside of her still developing ability is that with a large number of people in town, their auras were overlapping with each other to the point that she can't distinguish them individually. Her limited range was a major issue as well. Ah. The crowd. And as if a light bulb has been turned on, she realized that if she can locate the town square, then her chances of finding her father would be higher. She was about to run off when something, or rather some people, caught her attention. A few hundred meters away from her position was a small group of about 4 men and a woman. The woman was really pretty, but Luffy thinks she would be more beautiful if she wasn't frowning. Thinking that maybe she can ask for help, the little girl in red merrily skipped towards the group. Hey, why, me and my friends here are wondering if you want to join us for some drinks. A man of about 30 years of age flirtatiously drawled. He was wearing a very dirty white shirt with equally dirty light brown pants. From the way he talks, it was obvious that he was drunk. No. The woman replied coldly without looking at the man. Instead, her focus was on little Luffy, who was nearly approaching. Come on. We promise we're gonna have lots of fun. The man's companions, who was wearing a red tunic, joined in, while another flashed a disgusting wink at the lady who grimaced at the action. She rolled her eyes haughtily. Again. I said. No. She stated with a tone of finality and started to walk away, but was prevented from doing so as a thick hand had suddenly latched on her wrist. Boy. Where do you think you're going? The man who winked at her yelled, but before she can even fight back, another hand had attacked her other wrist. It was barely noticeable at first, but after the contact, she felt her strength was like being sapped away from her body. It wasn't enough to knock her out cold, but it was enough to subdue her. She looked at one of her captor's hands and internally panicked as she saw that the ring that the other man was wearing is made out of sea stone. Araseki. Damn it. For a minute, Luffy felt alarmed. It seems that the woman doesn't like the guys, as she originally assumed that they were friends. But then again, maybe they were just playing. Hello. She greeted politely and waved her hands towards them. The two men who wasn't restraining the woman looked at each other before a sly smile crawled on their lips. You. Luffy tilted her head at the woman, curious as to what she's gonna say. Luffy notes that she seems to be having a hard time talking. Go away. She tilted her head, confused. But I'm lost. The little girl stubbornly protested, much to the older woman's exasperation. How stupid can this girl be? Everyone thought. Is that so? The man in white then questioned with feigned sympathy. Don't worry. If you come with us, he gestured to his companions. We'll help you find your way back. Really? Laphita flashed a smile, looking at the woman. She saw her discreetly shook her head. Of course. Right, boys. The man reassured her while the others nodded their heads. He even knelt with one knee in front of the girl to make himself more believable. She held a finger under her chin, as if thinking. Nah, I don't think so. She shouted before landing a solid kick to the man's shin. Ag. The man in white screamed in agony as he felt his bone cracked from the intensity of the attack. Laphita just laughed and flashed out her tongue. I'm not stupid, you know. Her haki alerted her that someone was coming from her behind as she felt the wind whipped. With agility that adults only possesses, she rolled forward and did a cartwheel to evade and at the same time face her attacker whose foot met his companion's face. Yuck. She commented dryly. Only cowards attack from the back. The woman was losing it. This is outrageous. How is it possible that the little girl was able to defend herself while she was reduced to a sitting duck? Why you? The man in red ran towards the girl, but Luffy countered his attack by doing a frog leap on his crouched back and quickly dished out a back kick at her attacker's rear in retaliation, resulting in an epic face plant. This angered the man in white, abandoned the woman and motioned all of his men to catch Luffy. They weren't keen to allowing their egos to be crushed by a small girl. With now 4 attackers, Luffy was having a hard time evading each of their attacks. She may be as fast, but it was almost impossible to avoid every limb that was after her. Then the worst happened as a pair of limbs had grabbed her from behind. Let me go. She protested while wildly kicking her feet in the air. Shut up. Let him pack. She repeated louder until a sharp stinging pain invaded her cheeks, her head whipping to the side as she was slapped. Even at the hands of defeat she wishes that the woman had already escaped as she doesn't look like she was feeling well. What are we gonna do with her, boss? The man holding Luffy asks. We sell her, of course. The limping man stated with a disgusting smirk. Hearing this, she leveled her eyes to the man who slapped her with a cold glare, but at the same time she also saw the woman was now standing, her face was contorted in an undefinable fury, her hands were connected to shape like a heart. Miro Miro Mellow. Luffy can't believe what her eyes was seeing. As soon as the woman said those words, a pink heart-shaped beam radiated out of her hands towards their direction. She closed her eyes shut at the bright light, and when she opened it again, her jaw dropped a kilometer on the spot. The 4 men around her were now turned to stone. That is so cool. She yelled out, clearly awed by the display of power, and true to the Luffy way, she completely ignored the fact that she was still trapped in petrified arms, causing the woman to gain a tick mark on her forehead at her recklessness. And you? She roared, making Luffy stop from cheering. What are you doing in a place like this? She scolded harshly, but the degree of worry under her voice was hard to miss. I got lost. She sheepishly offered. Scoff. Do you know what those men will do to you? You almost got yourself arg. The woman protested died out as she grabbed little Luffy and freed her from the statue with a fierce kick from her stiletto, causing it to unceremoniously crumble on the ground. With Luffy now free from her restraints, the woman leveled herself to the 3-year-old. Where are your parents? She asks again, but this time more softly. Wait. Luffy stopped and closed her eyes for a moment. She concentrated harder with her haki to the point that her eyebrows were scrunched up. I can't feel Papa, she answered with disappointment and finally opened her eyes. You? Did you just use Kenbun-shoku haki? The woman asked incredulously. For a moment Luffy thought she was going to poop. Yep. Ever since I was. She paused and thought for a while, then hold 3 fingers in the air. 3. Huh? The woman was taken aback for a moment before gaining a thoughtful expression. What's your name, little girl? Mihawk didn't like what he was feeling right now. There was this gut-wrenching sensation that is telling him to hurry up. His throat was already parched from the heat and the continuous usage, but he never stopped calling his daughter's name. Laphida. He called again for the 100th time, but stopped as his blood ran cold. He felt someone familiar. But that person was with Luffy. As ridiculous as it may sound, Boa Hancock found herself drawn to this tiny little booger in front of her. She didn't like kids in general, but somehow, the girl in a red dress was different from the rest. It could be because of her courage as she had tried to save her from those filthy men that earned her respect. It could also be because of her rare talent that roused her interest. Normal 3-year-old kids don't have access to hockey like that. Or maybe. She was intrigued why the girl didn't turn into stone like most people do. But then again, children this age are still pure of tainted thoughts. She finally knew the reason why when she said her name. Monkey D. Laphida, but you can call me Luffy. She chirps. It was such a big name for a tiny little girl. It was decided then and there, this girl was too interesting to ignore. Laphida. Apaya. Laphida yelled in glee as she finally saw her father's figure and made a beeline towards him with big fat tears of joy rolling down her cheeks. The 18-year-old Hancock immediately stiffened at the sight of her co-warlord. Hush my child, I'm here now. He consoled her as he tightened his grip around her waist, all the while showering his tiny princess with S on her forehead. They could have stayed longer in that position to relish their reunion, but knowing that a warlord was present, Mihawk chose to break the hug shortly to address the team. Madam Boa Hancock. It's a pleasant surprise to see you here, he cautiously said as his hand was dangerously hovering, his sword fastened at his back. Whatever emotion that was displayed a while ago was now completely gone. Likewise Sir Dracul Mihawk, I did not, she replied in the same manner and raised a leg while she shifts her gaze quickly towards the girl. Expect this turn of events. Unbeknownst to Luffy, the two infamous figures were currently locked in a staring match that could probably destroy the whole town if anything goes awry. Instead, she chose the moment to express her surprise. Papa no One-san. Instantly breaking the tension between the warlords as the said One-san blanched at the title. Mihawk lowered his hand but maintained his soul-piercing gaze at the teenage empress who was doing the same until his daughter caught his full attention with a soft tug at his cloak. "Na papa, did you know that Hancock-ni-san saved me from those men a while ago?" She pointed at the now obliterated pieces of stones. "She was so cool," she exclaimed while throwing her hands in the air for emphasis. Learning this, Mihawk's eyes widened slightly before bowing gratefully to a now shell-shocked co-warlord. "Thank you for saving Luffy, for that, I am indebted." It took Hancock a few moments to recover her bearings. "HMMP. She scoffed and turned her head away, though in reality, she was only hiding her surprise at the rare display of humility by the older warlord and Lafitta's statement that she saved her while the truth is, it was the other way around. "I want her in my island the day after tomorrow and we can call it quits," she demands with a tone of finality and stormed off, leaving a waving Luffy and a perplexed Mihawk. "Appa? Did you fall asleep again with your eyes open?" Luffy asks, pulling him out from his deep thoughts. Maybe the warlord jokingly shrugged, he will just have Lafitta tell her everything once they're home. Shishishi. The day after tomorrow came and we find the father and child on their boat sailing towards the island of women. How their boat can sail in the calm belt without any wind. Luffy doesn't know either. Mihawk, after finding out what happened from Luffy, had finally relaxed. He originally thought that the newly appointed warlord was up to something, but as it turns out, the woman was just expressing her own form of gratitude. Also, he kept in mind that Lafitta must learn how to protect herself soon. He wouldn't let anything like that happen again. Not now, not ever. "I'll be picking you up afterwards, okay?" He spoke softly as he turns to her daughter who let out a huff of disappointment. "Nah papa, can't you really come inside?" she presses. They already had this conversation a few hours ago, but the girl was very adamant with her stance. It even took them 8 hours of tiring explanation to make his daughter understand what's at risk. He shook his head. "Luffy, the most important rule in that island is that no man can ever step inside their walls," he said slowly. He needs to make sure that Luffy learns how to respect the rules of other people. She needs to learn in an early age that she does not own the world. The girl pouted for a few seconds before crossing her arms and glared at the speck of land at the horizon. "Then, if Papa is not coming, Luffy's not coming," she exclaimed with a tone of finality. Lafitta, he let out a loud sigh. This was turning into a more stressful situation than he expected. "Hancock is trying to be your friend, don't you want to have a friend?" "I do. But Papa would be alone," she said in a frustrated tone. He was touched by the gesture and almost gave in, but for Luffy to grow up well, she also needs friends that would understand her more than he can. Difficult for him it might be, the warlord forced himself to smile. "It's alright. Papa wants to nap anyways," he half lied. "Fine if you say so," she half-heartedly conceded. "But don't go away, okay?" The forced smile had now turned to a real smile as Mihawk ruffled her hair. "Of course," he promised. Once their boat touched the shore, a small group of the Kuja pirates along with the Gorgon sisters, except for Hancock and Elder Nyan, welcomed the two. After a two to the cheeks and a warm goodbye hug, the women left the swordsman to his own devices. Even though Lafitta was saddened that they left her papa by the shore, she can't help but be mesmerized by the beautiful landscape of the unfamiliar island. The colorful fruit-bearing trees, the wild animals wandering around, and even her companions were very interesting as well. It was very different from her home and the town that they had visited. Unnoticed by everyone, the two teenage Gorgon sisters who was deliberately walking behind the entourage were talking about the sudden invitation. They knew by heart that their sister was very ruthless to foes and friends alike. "I get that she's a girl, but didn't Ain-sama say she doesn't like brats?" the tall bubble-headed Sandersonia whispered. "Ah yes. She did say that one time. But then, I heard Ain-sama talking to Elder Nyan last night." The slim Marigold answered in the same hushed tone, and as if her low voice wasn't enough, the blonde leaned closer towards her sister's ear. She said that the girl was very interesting. As the all-female group had reached the palace after half an hour of walking, Lafitta was ordered to stand at the middle of the arena. Around her, there is a small group of women wearing beach clothes that are playing tribal music, while the majority were seated in stone bleachers. Luffy did as told, but she doesn't know the exact reason why. Standing before her as she had remembered was pretty One-san, tall green One-san, old purple lady and tall yellow One-san. She didn't really know their names and only based it according to their appearances. "People of Amazon Lily," Elder Nyan addressed the people in a sagely tone. "Standing before you is a woman of exceptional courage and strength." Every woman present gasped, even Marigold and Sandersonia exchanged surprised looks. It was a long time ago, ever since they did a ceremony of recognition to outsiders. Yesterday, this little girl before you had saved the of our beloved Hebahem Sama from the hands of filthy men. She paused as the citizens expressed their mixed emotions. They immediately showered Luffy with praises, while they screamed curses towards the men. When the noise died out, the elder continued, under the orders of Hebahem Sama, it is only fitting that Madame Lafitte receives the privilege to become an honorary member of our tribe. She exclaimed dramatically before walking to a very clueless Luffy and placed a wreath of purple flowers on her head, while the crowd started cheering again from the sidelines. Let us all welcome her according to tradition. She shouted and raised her snake staff above her head and began batting it on the ground, while everyone followed. Ha! What can Luffy say? She didn't understand the big words yet. After the short ceremony and the banquet that followed, Lafitte was pissed, not figuratively but literally. In fact, she had very much enjoyed her time talking with the girls and accepting their offerings of food to the point that she had forgot to answer the call of nature. So with an almost full bladder, Luffy made her way into the inner cloister of the palace. She remembered Elder Nyan saying that if she ever felt the need to use the toilet, she needs to find the door with a pink heart. With that information in mind, she ran along the halls and glanced at each door until she spotted the correct one at the end of the hallway. Without wasting any time, she threw the door open without bothering to knock, as she can already feel her bladder bursting. She was mildly surprised that the toilet room here was bigger than what they have back home. The room itself was divided into two parts, a row of cubicles to the left and the bathroom to the right, which was only separated by a thick purple curtain. Once finished and relieved, her attention was caught by the sound of females laughing coming from the other side. Curious as to what lies beyond the curtain, she swayed the fabric out of the way and was met by the sight of three Gorgon sisters enjoying a hot bath. Hello everyone. She greeted them happily, though the result was a glass-piercing shriek from the three. What are you doing here? Hancock panic screamed as she hurriedly covered herself up. Ain Sama, she might have seen the mark, Marigold fearfully commented, while Sandersonia nodded her head. Oh. Lafitte softly said, realizing her mistake. I'm sorry, I should have knocked. She bowed her head. What? Did? Hancock gritted her teeth, she thought the girl can be trusted. I saw the mark of the slave, the little girl sadly immediately answered and averted her gaze. The two younger Gorgons transformed into their snake forms, while Hancock had her index finger and held it like a pistol. They were ready to kill if necessary, regardless of age. Rules be damned. It's okay, I don't like them either, they're bad. The answer left them confused, and as if reading their thought, Luffy continued in a very serious voice. Papa said that the celebration Daltons are jerks. Her gaze was now meeting theirs. I think they don't have the right to treat others like that. She screamed with honest conviction. The three Gorgons were taken aback from her statement, then Hancock snorted. She tried to prevent it at first, but to no avail, it broke out into a fit of hysteric laughter. Baka. She tried to speak, but her laughing spell was drowning out her words. Not celebration Daltons, see less tile dragons. Lafitte blushed so hard at her mispronounced word. I'm just 3 years old. She retorted. You'll see. One day I'll memorize the whole dictionary. And as soon as she said those words, the three girls were now on the floor laughing their guts out. Luffy got frustrated and yelled more mispronounced word, but her blush only deepened as the girls didn't stop laughing. The worst part was, they were now panting and wiggling like snakes from laughing so hard. Oh my, oh god. I can't stop. That was hilarious. The Empress said as she evened her breath and wiped the tears from her eyes. After 2 more minutes of more laughing, the three had finally pulled themselves together. Somehow in Lafitte's eyes, their auras seems to have lightened. Like the stale air around them had vanished, like a thorn had been plucked. Luffy, if isn't too much, Hancock started with a bashful blush. Can you keep this a secret between the 4 of us? She asks in a very hopeful tone, as even though their time as a slave was long over, the 3 sisters were still ashamed of their past. It scarred them in a way that they found it very difficult to trust anyone other than themselves. Luffy might be the only other person aside from Elder Nyan and Silver's Rayleigh that knows of their dark secret. Alright. You can count on me. She replied without hesitation. Luffy in all her childish obliviousness might have not noticed, but 3 damaged hearts had started their long journey to recovery because of her kindness. It has already been a few days after Luffy visited the Isle of Women. And apparently, with her declamation of hatred towards the celeb celestial dragons, she had become friends with the 3 sisters and consequently, with the whole nation. Needless to say, Mihawk was surprised for the second time around when this time, his fellow Shichibukai eagerly offered her assistance when Luffy needed someone to look after her. He didn't know if he should be thankful or get mad at the female warlord, because from the way she said it, it almost sounded that she was begging him to give her Lafitte. But the surprises did not stop there, no, as before they can leave the island, Hancock ran back to the palace, only to emerge with a gigantic bag full of gifts that was dragged by her and her sisters like slaves doing hard labor. The presents were very much appreciated by the male warlord, but come on. It nearly sunk their boat halfway home. And to add to the series of mysterious events, when Mihawk asked about what had happened inside the all-female island, Luffy's only reply was, "It's a secret," accompanied by a mischievous smile. It turns out that something good had blossomed from the bad. He gleefully muses as he watches his daughter color some pictures by his side. He was happy that the 3-year-old had made a friend. Unconventional as they were, he thinks that Luffy can learn a thing or two from the 3 sisters. The following day, Mihawk woke up with an excited smirk. After breakfast, he immediately retreated in his room and grabbed a pair of swords. "Lafita, come here for a second," he called out as a panting Luffy ran up to him. She was obviously still winded up from her dancing. "Yes, Papa, what is it?" the bubbly little girl asks between breaths as she was curious. "Today will be the start of your training," he enthusiastically informed her and shows her the epithet he was holding. It is similar to a rapier, though the end was made blunt as it was suited as a practice tool rather than a weapon. "Ooh," the girl exclaimed with gusto. "What are you gonna teach me?" she asks again as she eyes the shiny object. "Well, we bought you a rapier, right?" he reminds her. With their time together, the warlord had developed his own playful tone when talking to the girl. Luffy nods to this. She almost forgot about Mr. Limes. Oh, and yes, she had already bestowed a name for her sword. "Then, it is only right that you learn how to use it properly." To which the girl nodded again. "So, for today, I will teach you the basics of fencing." "Fencing?" she questioned with furrowed brows. "I thought you're gonna teach me how to use a sword. Are we gonna build a fence?" She suspiciously narrowed her eyes. Mihawk's sweat dropped, but technically speaking, his daughter was right. Earth, it is correct too, but in swordplay, fencing is a sport that involves 2 people who fight with rapiers like these. The person who can land the most hits wins. He explained, simply gaining a soft "oh" from his little one. But that said, they started. The first thing that Mihawk taught her daughter was the basics of dueling etiquette, how to hold the sword properly, defensive positions, footworks and lunges. Nothing difficult for a start, but it is the deciding factor if she can indeed become a great swordswoman in the future. When you start a duel, you must first bow to your opponent before readying your swords. He bowed gracefully and motioned his student to follow. On the other hand, Luffy curtsied before her sensei and flashed a bright smile. "Good. Now, I will show you the proper way to hold one." He raised his own epee horizontally and leaned the pad of his thumb at the top, and his index finger curled under the grip towards the side, while his 3 remaining fingers were wrapped at the bottom for support. Showing this to the girl, he asked to do the same. "Like this?" Lafita showed her hands. "Very good. Now that we got that covered, let's move on to the positions and lunges." Hi. In a span of 2 hours, Luffy learned the basics. Mihawk vocally applauded her lunges, extensions and footwork, as her dancing had greatly helped her become agile and flexible. She didn't even bat an eye whenever he asks her to maintain a pose for several minutes. Deciding that the girl had done well today, he promptly ended their lesson. That same night, Mihawk was seated alone in his throne as he had already tucked the little swordswoman in bed a few minutes ago. He can't help but wonder as to what kind of path would Luffy choose in the future. Will she dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman? Or will she choose another dream to chase like her mother? In his opinion, he would very much like it if Luffy chose neither and instead choose to lead a normal life. He did not want the girl to share the same fate like her whole clan. The father and mother that is currently fighting the government, a grandfather who is a celebrated marine hero, another grandfather who is at the top of the pirating world, and an uncle that is a government dog. He sighed tiredly. It was truly chaotic and terrifying. Though deep inside, something tells him that someday, his child would want more than an ordinary life. The only wish is that whatever path Luffy takes, she would find happiness. All he can do for now is hold her hand until the time that she decides. The following week, the father and teacher had deemed his 3-year-old daughter worthy to start the basics of attacking and parrying. And like last week, the Shichibukai was immensely pleased by the development. "Luffy, show me the basic attacks that you've learned so far," he commanded strictly while maintaining a critical eye towards his daughter. "Hi. The first one is called the single thrust," she exclaims and did an extended lunge with her epee forward. "Good, the next one." "The second attack is called the disengagement." She answers and did a lunge, but this time twirled her sword with a sharp flick of the wrist. "Great. Next." "The third is called the glide." She announces and slowly tilted her wrist sideward while slowly extending an arm as if her epee was touching another and did a lunge at an invisible opponent. "Perfect, and the last one?" "The last one is called the cut over." She smiles and flicked her epee to the other side. "But now show me the defensive moves." Hi. This routine went on every day for 2 months, as Luffy would diligently sacrifice a few hours of her playtime to practice her fencing skills. At first, she was only doing the gesture by herself, memorizing each move by heart. But at the start of the third month, Mihawk had started using his epee and engaging his daughter in mock battles. The most important thing that you must remember in fencing Schwick is to never turn your back to an opponent. Mihawk said while defending a barrage of attacks from Luffy who was buried deep in concentration. With both of their observation haki activated, the two exchanged non-lethal blows to one another. Their duel was mostly about parrying and defending, which took their training to a next level, as Luffy surprisingly developed her speed and haki quickly than he anticipated. But of course, being the greatest amongst the swordsmen in the world, Mihawk easily ended the battle with a soft flourish and an accompanying thrust to his daughter's stomach, eliciting a chuckle as the blunt edge tickled her. Picking up the girl like a bag of potatoes, the swordsmen brought her to their dining room where their Christmas feast was waiting for them. As the new year started, Luffy began studying basic mathematics, reading and writing. Mihawk was very much aware that Luffy was not as dumb as she lets on, but he did struggle at some point as the toddler had attention issues. He also learned that his daughter was passionately driven by motivation. So for every time she will do something right, rewards were promised, mostly in the form of toys or snacks. While if she did something wrong, some unneeded privileges were taken temporarily. Though the father rarely had a chance to punish the girl, as Luffy was an obedient and kind pupil. He was glad that he bought those child development books a few years ago. He sometimes wondered what would have happened if Luffy was placed in Garp's care. Would Luffy enjoy the same treatment? Nah, he would probably chuck her at the jungle at night and call it training. He didn't know how right he was. It was on the third month of the year when we find Luffy wide awake in bed way past her bedtime. She seems to be in deep thought. The reason why is because tomorrow is her father's birthday. Until now, she doesn't know what to give him. It was no-brainer that in her almost 4 years of existence, the Shichibukai was the only person around her most of the time. So obviously, Luffy was wary of every minute details concerning her father. She felt that she needs to make her father happy on his special day. She had already tried her hands on writing a letter, composing a poem, dancing, drawing a picture, and even tried singing. But to no avail, all of those weren't good enough for Luffy. Appa is the best, so he deserves the best. Her question was finally answered as her gaze rested on the window of her room. More specifically, the outline of the forest outside the castle. Why didn't I think of that? A wide smile crept from her lips as she now knew what to give to her father. Knowing that her father will surely kill her if she goes outside, she decided to do the task tomorrow and go to bed with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. The following day. Waking up earlier than usual, Luffy hurriedly equipped herself with a red Parker jacket and grabbed her sword Mr. Limes, which was leaning by her bedside table, before sneakily opening the window from her second floor room. Seeing that she can manage the fall, she jumped and made a beeline towards the foggy jungle. To be completely honest, this was her first time to roam outside without Mihawk, as she was ordered not to go outside alone as it was dangerous. But in her own young mind, she thinks that the punishment was worth it as long as her papa was happy with her gift. Luffy didn't stop running for quite some time and casually evaded several obstacles like huge boulders of rocks and trees by using her gymnastic capabilities while slashing vines and bush that hangs from trees or is in the way until she arrived at a clearing. Mysterious as it may sound, it was the only part of the forest illuminated by sunlight. She then slowly walked towards the small expanse of land that was free of fog and inhaled the combined aromatic scents of daisies, sunflowers, carnations, lavenders, and roses that brought a sense of warmth to the little girl. She smiled nostalgically as she remembered that they once had a small picnic here. "Nah, Papa?" Luffy asked her father as she took a big bite out of her sandwich. "Yes, sweetie. What's your favorite flower?" She tilted her cutely in sheer curiosity. "My favorite is rose of any color, but I like red roses the most." Mihawk answered with a smile and returned the question to her daughter. "I like red roses too, but I love white roses better." Wary of the fragile flowers beneath her feet, she tiptoed her way to the area where the roses were plentiful. She smiles widely as she saw that the roses were in full bloom. "I'm sure Papa would love this very much," she excitedly squeals. Without thinking further, she wrapped her hand on the stem of the rose, only to withdraw her appendage as she was pricked by the accompanying thorns. "Tai," she yelped loudly as she rubs the throbbing spot with a drop of blood, now starting to pool together. She didn't know about the thorns. Traumatized, she used Mr. Limes to cut of the stems. And as the colic was quite long, she did it very carefully to avoid ruining the flower petals. She only stopped when she had about 14 to 15 pieces of unevenly cut stems. The way back to the castle proved to be more difficult than anticipated as she had sheathed her sword in exchange for holding the bouquet in her two little hands. Aside from that, another problem that she has encountered was she can't do her stunts and at the same time risk the safety of the flowers. She was left with no choice but to run and go around the obstacles instead of leaping through them. Even with her unnatural talent for observation hockey, Luffy was not spared by the mud and the dead branches in the forest. Fortunately, she can already see the walls of her home, signifying that she was near. "Appa," she called out as she entered the gigantic double doors at the entrance. When no one answered, she used her hockey to locate her papa, who was now at the kitchen, probably making them some yummy breakfast. "Appa." She cheered as she saw her father drinking some coffee with an unreadable expression. "Look. This is my birthday gift to you." She presented the bucket of flowers. The warlord took it from her hands and stared at the rugged form of Luffy, then at the stems. "Blood. Don't you like roses?" Luffy asks with big eyes. She doesn't know why her papa was not talking. Bloody repeated again, but this time audible for the girl to hear. "There's blood on it." He looked at his daughter. "Yeah, I might have got pricked by the thorns on the way back." She smiled sheepishly and held out her hands that was grazed and bloodied. "No, Luffy," he shook his head. "Papa doesn't like this," he sadly muttered, earning a soft gasp from the toddler. "Oh, I thought Papa said he likes red roses. I might have heard it wrong." She hung her head dejectedly. Her hard work went to waste after all. "No, what I mean to say is, I don't like this particular ones." He clarified and saw that the little girl's head sunk lower. "Is it because it's ugly?" Luffy asks with tears threatening to burst at any moment. Mihawk hurriedly shook his head in reassurance. "No, it is because these roses hurted you," he answered and knelt before the girl. "I don't like things that hurt you." Luffy stared in shock, and as much as she forces not to, the tears that she was holding back broke like a dam. "You're worth more than all the roses in the world, Luffy." "I am?" she asks. Mihawk nodded, but he was smiling now as he picked up the girl and nestled her in his arms. "More than roses or wine." "I'm sorry I went out without your permission," she pouted. It's okay," he cooed while the girl finally wept away the remnants of her tears. "Appa?" "Yes, Luffy?" he asks and looked at the small figure in his arms. "Happy birthday," she greeted and ed the warlord on the cheeks. "Kuku, why thank you, my dear princess. Now how about some breakfast?" "Yes, breakfast." She eagerly nodded her head. "Kuku." Time flew by and we now find a 6-year-old Luffy reading some children's book in her room that she got as presents on her birthday 2 months ago. With the passing of the years, it was no surprise that Luffy had underwent some physical changes, as her hair was now considerably longer as it now reaches her waist. She had also grew a couple inches taller too, and had gained some weight, though the added weight was barely recognizable as she was naturally skinny. Of course, there were things that never changed, such as her ever so lively, bubbly personality, her affinity for dresses that only grew in numbers as she quickly outgrew her old ones, her passion for dancing and fencing that only improved as time goes by, and last, but certainly not the least, her ever-growing appetite that was now enough to satisfy 3.5 adults. These changes didn't only affect the girl, but it also touched her father. One good example is that he now sometimes leave Luffy at the care of the Gorgon sisters for a week or two to find some new rivals that can satiate his growing thirst for a good fight. He was, after all, a competitive man by nature. On the first few times that he left, he was met by a bawling little girl that doesn't want him to go, but as he explained, along with some unexpected help from Boa, the girl had finally learned to let go and in return was promised with souvenirs and trinkets from his trips while the ladies take over her various trainings. They were indeed spoiling Luffy. But at the same time, they can't help it as the girl was very adorable, and the fact that she diligently works hard in her chores and practice every day only proves that the girl was worthy to be rewarded. But alas. This was the time that the two Shichibukai hated the most. It was the time where the world government is demanding their tariffs or a certain percentage from their pillages. Obviously, Mihawk has yet to give his part as he was occupied for the past few years in raising Luffy. Hancock, on the other hand, only heeds the organization's call if her treaty with them was under threat, which is what is happening right now from her lack of activities. It wouldn't be a big deal if money was the only problem, as they can fish it out from their own pockets. They weren't poor. But as Lady Luck was frowning at the two, it was also stated in their contracts that they must maintain a fearsome reputation in the eye of the masses, which was impossible to accomplish if they weren't seen in public themselves. So in other words, they were also tasked to terrorize and conquer islands that was not aligned with the world government. It was a well-known fact to all veteran sailors that all the former and present warlords who joined the said organization was solely for their own selfish reasons, and once revoked, would surely create an inconvenience to both parties, namely, the benefits that the appointed warlords enjoy, and the balance of power for the world government, which the latter is trying to avoid at all cost. To cut the story short, they both must complete, and Luffy would be left alone with no one to look after her. It was a week before they have to leave when we find a very frustrated Mihawk brooding in his throne. He had already skimmed his mental list of everyone that is eligible to look after Luffy for at least half a year to a full year at most. Sad to say, no one seems to be near the Grand Line, as most of the action was taking place at the New World right now. The distance itself was not the only obstacle met, as considering that the first half of the Grand Line was crazy enough for newcomers to be called a pirate's graveyard, then the chances that his 6-year-old daughter being mentally scarred for life in the New World is highly possible. She isn't ready for the big leagues yet. He is currently looking for someone who has a territory or an island under his or her protection that is far away from the chaotic sea of the Grand Line, preferably within the Four Blues, as they were more peaceful like Monkey TG. Arp. He face-palmed in realization. He completely forgot about the Vice Admiral. Sometime when Luffy was 4 years old, Mihawk had told Luffy about their wacky family tree. Gladly, the girl took it in strides and declared that Mihawk was still her Papa Hockey, and Dragon was to be called father, much to the former's joy, as he had actually enjoyed the more casual and affectionate term than father, PFFFT. Back then, he actually considered for a moment if Luffy should know the truth when she is older, but as the all-knowing books of child development had advised the parents of adopted children that it is better to make them understand where they stand at an earlier age to avoid resentment, he eventually followed the tip and was thankful for doing so up to this day. It didn't take long before he whipped out his den mushy and dialed the number of the marine hero. Puru. The sleeping snail eventually woke up, followed by a loud and gruff voice erupting from the receiver. "Oh, who's this? Hawk Brad. Vice Admiral Garp, pleasant afternoon to you too," Mihawk drawled in his bored tone and used every inch of his training to prevent himself from rolling his eyes from the lack of manners of the marine official. "What do you want?" the snail stated with narrowed eyes. "Nothing at all, I was just wondering if you are interested to meet your granddaughter," he baited with a feigned innocent expression. The speaker in the other line gasped before the snail's feature contorted in anger. "Lulafida. What is she doing there with you, you damned pirate scum?" The old man roared in outrage, causing the Shichibukai to distance his ear from the eardrum wrecking noise. "Aha, it seems that your son didn't tell you that Lafita was placed under my care 6 years ago," he quipped in a smug tone. But really, Mihawk did know that the couple had kept their lips tight to the old marine, as they all know that he would probably abduct the kid. He was just rubbing the fact at the old fart's face. "That good-for-nothing son of mine," the speaker on the other line grumbled. "Of course I want to. But why call now?" Mihawk kept his poker face. "Because the government had called for my service and I think this is the best time for the child to spend a year with her grandfather." "Not." The snail stayed silent for a while before a sigh escaped its mouth. "Fine. When are you leaving?" "By the end of this week," he answered. "Oh, and Vice Admiral. I would appreciate it if you don't do something like throwing Lafita in the jungle in the middle of the night and call it training," the Shichibukai said as an afterthought. "Wahahaha. But how would she grow up into a strong woman like her mother?" The old man confirmed Mihawk's suspicion, which dazed the younger male a little, as his suspicion was apparently spot on. "We didn't actually train like that," he corrected with unease in his voice. Nonsense. Lafita would be fine." The other reassured, but it didn't do anything to reassure Mihawk. "But. Alright, gotta go, see ya at the end of the week. Chick." Never in his life did Mihawk want to bang his head on the cold hard wall like right now. "What did I just do?" he sighed as he sunk further in his throne. It seems like calling the girl's grandfather did more harm than good. That night, he decided to inform his daughter about his plans. He was pretty nervous as to how the 6-year-old would react. "Luffy?" he called casually as he cut their steaks for dinner. The girl, whose eyes were on the juicy piece of meat, looked up. "Yes, Papa. I was called in for a job, so I might be absent for quite some time," he stated cautiously and hands a plate to the kid. After thanking her father, the girl sat back on her chair. "Am I staying at Hancock Nissan's place?" she voices in and took a bite from her dinner. "Unfortunately," he sighed. "No." "Eh?" The girl threw him a surprised look, her fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. "Then where am I staying?" "With your grandfather," he eyed her expression. "Whitebeard Jai-chan." The girl almost squealed in excitement. She had long took a liking in a pirate's life ever since, knowing that Lolita, her mother, was a pirate too. "With Garp in East Blue," he answered with distaste. "Oh," she expressed her disappointment, but quickly got excited in meeting the marine. "The Marinaji-chan. How long?" "For 1 year. 1 year," she spat the steak as her eyes went wide. Mihawk nodded and eyed the flying morsel as it flew into the corner. "He needs to clean that up later." "Okay." She shrugged nonchalantly. Surprised golden eyes stared at the younger's face, looking for any form of resentment. "You're not mad?" "No." She shook her head along with her raven locks. "Why not?" "Because it's a job, right?" the girl asked like he was dumb. "Right." He smiled soon after. He was glad that the girl was taking everything well. "You'll be leaving at the end of the week." She hummed before gaining a thoughtful expression. "East Blue, huh? She can't help but wonder as to what kind of adventure she'll have. And the rest of their dinner was spent in comfortable silence. As the day of their departure arrived, we see Luffy and Mihawk standing side by side at the lone rickety dock of Kuragana Island. Luffy, if you ever need anything, just look in your bag. I've packed you a 100 bento boxes, 29 boxes of sweets, 50 packs of Sea King jerky, 2 sacks of rice crackers, 2 tin foils of biscuits, 10 packs of dried squid, 100 sheets of dried seaweed, 5 sacks of cooked rice, 5 sacks of uncooked rice, a bottle of soy sauce, a kilogram of salt, 59 pieces of toothbrush, 30 tubes of toothpaste, 4 cartons of dental floss, 15 red combs, 10 boxes of flu medicine, 70 boxes of soap, 12 jars of shampoo, 12 jars of conditioner, 12 bottles of your baby cologne, 365 dresses, 365 sets of underwear, 1,000 pieces of bobby pins, 100 boxes of bandages, 5 jars of burn cream, a bag of cotton balls, 3 bottles of disinfectant, 20 candles, 5 boxes of matches, 6 jars of insect repellent, 4 jars of lotion, 12 bottles of mouthwash, 12 cartons of baby powder, powdered tea, powdered juice, powdered milk, curry powder, 10 gallons of water, 20 throwing knives, a portable tent, 10 knitted scarves, 3 warm fluffy jackets, 7 blankets, 44 of your favorite stuffed toys and 5 million belly. I kinda rushed, so those are the only things that I managed to prepare, he said in one breath. Luffy merely blinked at her papa. I'm not going to war, am I? She asked slowly. Mihawk chuckled. No, but with Garp it's kinda like you're going to one. He playfully rolled his eyes, earning a wide-eyed look from a now terrified Luffy. I was just kidding. He added to her relief. Oh, I. A sound interrupted them. Is that Jai-chan? Luffy points towards the direction of a gray-haired man who was waving at them. Mihawk nods and pulled the girl in an embrace. I need to go now. Be a good girl, okay? He asks, and felt the girl tightened. A reason why he didn't want to wait for the Marine was because almost all of their past interactions only resulted in a round of insults and threats, which he was avoiding for his daughter's sake. Who knows what kind of words she will learn from that old Marine. I'm gonna miss Papa, he heard her mutter. Papa's gonna miss you more. He answers back. Nope, I'll miss Papa the most. She said firmly and let go. If you say so, Princess, he winks and pressed on her forehead. Don't forget to train every day, okay? She nodded. Bye, Papa. Take care. She cried out and blew as Mihawk boarded his boat and sent back a flying to his daughter before he set sailed. As the Marine's ship moored into the docks, Luffy can't help but be nervous in meeting her grandfather. Sooner than she expects, a tall man in a black suit jumped from the said ship and was now standing before her. Are you Luffy? He asked softly. Yes, she answered meekly and did a polite curtsy. It took Garp a moment to reply, as he was busy looking at his granddaughter, who was now 6. She looks just like her mother, with those wide dark brown almost kohler eyes and regally pinched nose, but he can't deny that his son, Dragon, has a few contributions here and there as well, point in case the traditional D grin and her peachy complexion that was different from her mother's alabaster-like skin. I'm your grandfather, Monkey D. Garp. He exclaimed with a few tears wetting his eyes. He had finally met the girl in the picture he had received several years ago. Luffy smiled a little as her haki detected that the man before her was a good and proceeded to hand her grandfather a big paper parcel. Papa and I made these for you, she said sweetly. Garp gasps in surprise at the unexpected thoughtfulness. What's this? He asks as he rattled the huge paper bag with unexpected gentleness. Donuts. Papa said those are your favorite. She beamed. I glazed them, she said proudly as an afterthought. Arigato, I'm pretty sure these are delicious. He gratefully replied and ruffled her hair soon afterwards. Come. I'll introduce you to everyone. The two made their way into the Marine's ship, and Luffy was surprised at how it was bustling with life. It seems that everyone has a job to fulfill. To be honest, this was her first time riding a big ship, as her father prefers using their boat, and the time with the Kujas were often spent inland. Boys. Garp's loud voice resonated throughout the manned ship, effectively calling the attention of everyone on board. This is my very cute granddaughter, Monkey D. Luffy. She would be staying with us for the return trip to East Blue. He continued and eyed the filed-up men. I expect everyone to treat her with respect. Do I make myself clear? Aye. Vice Admiral Garp. They saluted with gusto and went back to their abandoned positions. Luffy tried to stifle a giggle. It reminded her of Hancock and her people, only this time it was a little scarier. Luffy, please, feel free to go around and explore. I'll just prepare your sleeping quarters. The Vice Admiral said and left the young girl to her own devices with her gigantic bag towed on his back. He didn't even seem to notice how heavy it was. Hearing this, Luffy hummed excitedly and immediately began her first adventure in the Marine ship. She ran towards every corner and room as she eyed her surroundings. She noticed that it was dog-themed. The dog with a bone figurehead, the bone-shaped masts, the stencil dog wallpaper, the paw-shaped windows, and the dark blue blankets with cute dogs and bones designs. It seems that Gramps liked doggies very much, she muttered to herself as she skipped around. Truly, the ship awed the little girl. But what she didn't understand was the conveyor belts near the figurehead and the ridiculous amount of cannonballs neatly stacked on every corner of the ship. Deciding that it was better to ask than guess, she approached a bearded Marine who was at the corner. With a soft hug on the man's jacket, the girl successfully caught his attention. "Nah, Mr. Marine?" she asks. "Oh hey Lafitte. Do you need anything?" The girl shook her head. "Why are there so many cannonballs?" She pointed at the stack near them. "Ah, it's for your grandfather," the Marine replied. "What for?" She tilted her head in confusion. "He throws them at the enemy's ship, of course," he said with a proud smile. "Bro? As in with his hands?" The older nodded and her eyes began to sparkle. "Wow, Gramps is so strong," she remarked. Indeed he is." He agreed and shook his head fondly as the girl began running again. "Jai-chan. Jai-chan. Jai-chan." The girl ecstatically shouted as she approached the old man who was in the kitchen having coffee and eating the donuts that Luffy gave him. "Yes, little munchkin, what is it?" the Marine asks as he continued to devour his snack. "Is it true that you can throw cannonballs with your bare hands?" she eagerly asks. "Damn right I can." Garp immediately replied with his mouth still full. Of course the old hoot wants his granddaughter to shower him with affection, so who was he to play humble? "Can you please show me?" she begged. Seeing the cute little kid so hyped out instantly melted the old man's heart and finished the remainder of his snack in one go before picking up the giggling girl like a plank. Reaching the figurehead, Garp put his granddaughter down and grabbed a cannonball. "Okay Luffy. Grandpa's gonna show you how it's done. Jinkatsu Mateo." He shouted and flung the iron ball with no effort at an alarming distance before it eventually exploded. "Wow." Luffy's jaw dropped and turned to her grandpa. "That's faster than using a cannon," she remarked, which caused the older to blush as he basks under the praise. Eyeing the ball in her grandfather, Luffy was pretty tempted to throw one as well. "Gramps, can I try?" she asks innocently. "You're still a kid, maybe after a few years." He calmly rejected. Too bad, Garp made the mistake of looking at his granddaughter. Looking back at the seasoned Vice Admiral was the face of conscience. Her naturally big dark brown eyes were larger and was filled with unshed tears that is ready to burst at any moment, her pink lips quivering and her cheeks blushing. She was like an abused kitten, alone, on a cold winter night, starving, with no shelter to go back to. The Marine was instantly crushed by guilt itself. He was a very bad person. The scum that should not live should he reject this hurt little kitty. The older monkey hung his head in defeat. "Okay," he sighed. "Yay." Luffy cheered, doing a complete 180, and grabbed a cannonball with ease. "Najai-chan. Can I use my legs?" This alerted the elder. "Are you sure? You might get hurt." But Luffy shook her head determinedly and smiled. "I can do it." "Then go ahead. I can't see why not." He shrugged, and at the same time, he was very interested as to what his granddaughter can do. This called everyone's attention as they were worried at the outcome of the unexpected development. The ship's doctor and nurse were already on standby. They were whispering at how the Vice Admiral was a crazy old geezer who disregards his granddaughter's safety. They didn't see the hurt kitty look, that's why it was easy for them to judge. Luffy, after taking a deep breath while thinking of a cool attack name, threw the cannonball a few meters upwards and launched herself in midair, which earned a gasp from every Marine before. The Kyaku. Sakamawashijeri Nagirabashi, she twirled and did a powerful reverse roundhouse kick with her heel at the cannonball, which flew at an incredible speed like her Jai-chan's before exploding at a distance. Several jaws dropped on the floor. There was no denying, this was truly Monkey D. Garp's granddaughter. Did you see that?" One grunt managed to stutter. "She kicked it as if it was a soccer ball." Another one shouted in disbelief. Meanwhile, Garp was currently in his own La La Land. Rear Admiral Monkey D. Lafitte is such a strong and beautiful woman. Of course. She's Vice Admiral Garp's granddaughter. Can't you see where she got the looks in that monster strength? You're right. We should worship them. And every Marine, including Sengoku and the three admirals, bowed in front of the two with offerings of donuts and meat. Wahahahaha. Wahahahaha. Garp's giddy laughter rang throughout the silence. "I was actually thinking that you should marry a fine Marine someday, but screw that. I'm sure Tsuru would be very happy to train you." Luffy, who was very pleased with herself, turned to her grandfather, obviously not hearing clearly what he said a few moments back. "Training for what, Jai-chan?" "To be a fine Marine, of course. We need more strong people like you to help us protect innocent people." He stated like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "But I don't want to be a Marine," Luffy protested, causing everyone in hearing range to feel dread creeping up their bones. Huh? The Vice Admiral narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Luffy, if your grandfather forces you to become a marine, say that you're still not decided. Her papa's words echoed throughout her brain, as if warning her from danger. Yet because I'm still not decided. She half lied. Hearing this, the marines watching let out a sigh of relief. Wahahaha. Okay. But, you'll eventually come around. Garp laughed again and picked the girl up for some snacks. It had been truly a great day for Garp. After dinner, we find Luffy and Garp sitting by the railing. They have already entered the calm belt a few hours ago, and with that time passed, the two had already bonded with each other. They have talked about a lot of things. Mostly, about the older's adventure being a marine. Stories of his battles and places that he had been to filled the young girl's mind. For a moment, she almost considered saying yes to her grandfather's offer, but as her papa had said, for every action lies a consequence. Should you choose without thinking, those consequences will haunt you for the rest of your life. So in the end, she stood by her stance and promised that she would eventually decide later on. She didn't know where it came from, but the question made its way to her lips. Naj-ai-chan, what's my father like? She blurted. Garp chuckled and threw an amused look at his granddaughter before bringing his gaze back to the sea. Your father is a very dangerous and a crazy man. To tell you the truth, I didn't know what Lolita saw in him. He replied bluntly. He didn't see how the young girl's smile fell a little. But underneath of all those cuckoo-ness lies a kind-hearted and a fair man. It just doesn't show in his face, he continued with a nostalgic smile. In a way, he's like that sword brat. People can't really tell what they're feeling by just looking at them. Luffy only nodded to this in agreement. She had seen pictures of her papa Haki and her mama Lolita when they were younger, but none of her biological father. In her young mind, she can only see a faceless man hidden in the shadows beside her always smiling mother. She had asked her papa multiple times about him, and even with the most precise description, the image didn't click in her head. Do you have a picture of him? She asks with hopeful eyes. Mihawk is her papa forever and ever, but she can't help but be curious about the other one. The one that some parts of her came from. The one that is only her father by blood. It's too much to ask to have just one look. The older man held a single finger in the air as his other hand rummaged through his pocket. This one is quite old, probably 8 to 9 years before you were born. He notifies and hands the picture to his granddaughter. Luffy received it like it was a jewel that would crumble with pressure. Looking at the battered paper, she saw two men standing side by side. The one on the left was no doubt her grandfather, who still haven't got any wrinkles or gray hair. He was grinning madly beside another raven-haired male with long spiky hair that reaches his shoulder. He too was smiling, though it kinda looked awkward. She hummed in contentment and handed back the picture to her grandfather. What do you think? He asked her. Luffy shrugged and replied. Papa Haki is cooler. She grinned before an unexpected yawn crawled up to her chest. Wahahahaha. Can't blame you, the older replied before standing up. Alright, it's time for bed, girlie, let's go. The girl nodded and took the hand of her grandfather as they walked back inside the ship. The following morning, Garp along with some marines were now at the kitchen having their round of morning coffee. It has been a well-known threat in the crew that if anyone is not awake a little after sunrise, an awaiting fist of love would serve as punishment. Of course no one wanted their heads to get bashed into their shoulders first thing in the morning. Seeing that all is well with his subordinates, he decides to wake his granddaughter the all Garp way. He may have let her go easy yesterday, but he wasn't keen on letting the fine weather today go to waste without training. Rise and shine, Luffy. He punched the door open with great force, causing the hinges to break and the poor plank of wood to crash unceremoniously to the floor. Eh? He scanned the room. He was very much expecting a shocked and terrified puffy-eyed girl that is still in bed, but surprisingly, there was no one there. Laphita. He repeated and checked every place where the girl could hide. Ace had done so many times when he comes to visit his grandson, but no one can hide at the infamous Garp the Fist. They always run. Wahahaha. He shook his head fondly as he walked out of the room in search of the escapee. Laphita was already awake half an hour ago. She was currently sitting crossed legs on the figurehead of the ship. With eyes closed and a relaxed posture, one would think that she is sleeping upright, but in reality, she was currently meditating. This was her new training regimen that the two warlords had tailored for her. After all, she wasn't just dilly-dallying these past few years. In fact, with the help of her papa and Hancock Nichin, the girl had improved her observation Haki to the point that she can will at any time she desires. Her range may be limited at the moment, but this too would eventually be fixed with time and practice. For a little girl, Laphita is smart and talented. But there are still many things in this world that she does not understand and cannot explain. So to make up for that perfectly natural flaw, the two warlords devised a systematized table of how she can explain what she is feeling with her Haki with the use of colors. For emotions, they used the color of the rainbow to signify a mood. red for anger, orange for excitement, yellow for joy, green for sickness, blue for sorrow, indigo for resentment and violet for tranquility. The exception was black as it signifies malice. Aside from emotions, they also allocated colors that classifies a creature's strength. Those beings who are practically defenseless are labeled as white, while those who can defend themselves though still lacking in a lot of areas are brown. Point in case the newly trained marines and the wild animals that lives in a forest. Moving higher in the ranks of strength, bronze is used for people with enough fighting experience but are still relatively weak, silver for people who possesses a satisfactory level of power, such as the majority of the Kujas with their natural affinity for hockey, gold are for people whose strength are far greater than anyone else, such as the two younger Gorgon sisters, and finally, platinum is used for those are insanely strong, such as Mihawk, Hancock and Garp. But within these ranks there are some those who are caught in between, which is described by the girl with the color's brightness. For example, Hancock is a platinum though Mihawk's is far brighter than hers, but then, compared to the two, Garp's shines the brightest. And the brightest one of the three is currently standing behind her. She can feel the danger emanating from the older D, and although it isn't deadly or malicious, she knows better than to ignore it. "Wake up, brat. Fist of love," came the shout. But Luffy can do better than that. The strike was coming from above her head and she was left with no choice but to take advantage of the space between her Jai-chan's legs. She rolled back and did several back walkovers to distance herself from the enemy. "You're fast," the other commented, but his dangerous aura still left Luffy in high alert. She smiled and did a curtsy. "I've been training." "Wahahaha." As expected. The older said but vanished from his position and instantly closed the distance between them. "But too bad you're no match for Grandpa." Luffy immediately answered the punch aimed to her left by ducking and used the time that Garp was recoiling his fist to perform 10 quick back handsprings to get away. She didn't need the use of hockey to know that she was no match for the old man, so fighting was out of the option. She can only hope that the other would get tired soon. She quickly drew a knife under her dress and threw it in the direction of the marine, which was masterly evaded. "Boy. Are you trying to kill me?" the elder shouted in anger, which earned a laugh from Luffy. "But you didn't," she replied with a mischievous smirk. So far, Garp was the only person she had training with that was voicing all of his thoughts loudly in his head. It could be because this was only a sparring match, or in Luffy's opinion, was only doing so to gauge her strength. But the smirk, she feigned an axe kick which the other took by raising his fist. The 6-year-old immediately grabbed the opportunity and used the arm as a leverage to perform a forward handspring by grabbing the older's broad shoulders to slide across his back. With agility and grace, the girl performed a complicated combination of handsprings and twists to cover ground, as well as to evade the incoming barrage of attacks from Garp. Plan 1 success. Reaching the mast, the two continued their hit and evade routine, but the older was in for a surprise, as Luffy deliberately threw the knife earlier for a different purpose. Stepping one of her foot onto the lodged knife, she used her leg strength and the knife's inert flexibility as a makeshift trampoline to rocket her upwards to the sails, causing the marines who saw them to have another round of an epic jaw-dropping session. "Clever brat." Garp huffed and crossed his arms before turning away. Luffy took it that she won and cheered, but to her surprise, the older jumped and when he reached his zenith performed another jump, causing the younger D to drop her jaw in horror. "Depot. Bwahahaha. But you're still just a brat," Garp exclaimed and readied his fist for the ultimate fist of love the world has yet to see. Luffy dropped her expression as a memory crossed her mind. "There's still plan 2. All men are physically bigger and stronger than women, but in return we are blessed with agility and wit," Hancock preached as they were having tea one fine afternoon. "Then what should I do?" a 5-year-old Luffy asked. Marigold perked up at this and commented, "Use their weight against them. That's the only thing that a kid your size can use to take down a full-grown man." Luffy looked confused and tilted her head. She gets the point but she doesn't know how. Sandersonia, who was doing some reading, nodded her head in agreement. "That's true, but when there are times that you can't use it against them, you can trap them in a submission lock." "Submission? Wait. The thought of their past conversation flooded her head. It's now time to put that to the test. When Garp was at her eye level, she nimbly grabbed his prepared wrist with her 2 hands and with a full body swing to the side, latched herself through the man's back as her legs was wrapping tightly at his neck. To put it simply, she locked him in a head scissor armbar. But the main attack was yet to be performed as their foe was yet to come. She calculated that her grandfather would probably fall on his back to crush her with his weight, and as they descended, she let go of the man's hand, but quickly used her legs to change her position, resulting in her being on top of the marine. Boom. From afar, many people swear they saw a mushroom cloud. My back, Garp groaned as the cloud of dust had settled. "Victory!" Luffy cheered and did a peace sign pose before standing up. The vice admiral also stood up and brushed himself as if he didn't fall from 100-something feet. Mass. Observation hockey, knife throwing and martial arts huh? He thoughtfully commented before dishing out a light talk at the girl's head. Uchi Luffy popped her tongue out comically as the punch wasn't really strong. When the laughing figure retreated into the kitchen, several Marines approached the girl and one of them shook her hand. Congratulations. You're the first one I know to floor Vice Admiral Garp. He said while the others nodded. Luffy gave them a weird look and shook her head. No, I didn't. She denied, causing the others to look like she grew another head. Jai-chan was so holding back. She explained. He was only curious how strong I was. She shrugged and skipped to the kitchen, leaving a stunned group. That was holding back. Was what everyone thought. A few days had passed and to Luffy's relief, her grandfather had let her be in her training. She also heard from a bunch of the crew that they will be arriving soon. With her belongings idly lying beside her near the railings of the ship, her gaze was currently focused on the speck of land at the horizon that is growing in size by the minute. She was only pulled out from her thoughts as her grandpa spoke. Once we arrive we'll have an early dinner. I advise that you eat as much as you can, as you will begin your survival training by nightfall. He said. Luffy, hearing this, looked up to her. Jai-chan. What for? I don't think I need that survival training, she smugly said. Garp raised an eyebrow and shook his head in disappointment. You were spoiled by that sword, brat. He groaned, much to Luffy's irritation. I'm not. She protested. The Marine sighed and looked at his granddaughter with serious eyes. Why Luffy? He started. When you're stranded in an unfamiliar island, can your strength give you shelter during a cold night? He asks. Can your speed tell you which fruits are poisonous and edible? Can brains alone save you from the pangs of thirst? Luffy can only stare at the old man. She didn't expect such wisdom from her usually laughing and donut-eating grandfather. No, it can't, she shamefully admitted. That is why I want you to learn how to live with almost nothing, he points out in a more softer tone. You need to learn how to make shelter, hunt for food, find fresh water, and those are only the basics. He trailed off. On that instant, Garp saw a flash of determination in the little girl's eyes. He knew that like every D he had met, she would eventually set her heart on a mission that could change the world. Whichever faction she chooses, only time can tell. I understand. She answered with fierce resolve, like she was replying to an instructor. Garp only smiled as the ship finally touched the dock of Fuchsia Village. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Amber.Vale22 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.